Hi, I'm Carol Bowser, founder of Conflict Management Strategies, where I help organizations of all types and sizes and people of all different backgrounds to be able to either prevent or address workplace conflict. I'm also a military spouse and founded my company while my husband was still on active duty and then through the times that he was in the reserves. So I want to share with you a couple of tips, tricks, and insights on how to handle polarizing conversations. So let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, I want to share with you a story. There I was, right in the middle of delivering a training on respectful workplaces, and you would not believe what happened. I was standing in front of the group, dealing with a respectful workplace training, dealing with. And then someone in the audience who is kind of a senior member of the group says, "How do you even deal with those people?" He said, those flat earthers, those anti-vaxxers, those blah, 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 blah. And he ended with, "They aren't worth my time." Now, we were in the middle, as I said, of a respectful workplace training. So this kind of blaming and shaming and othering and minimizing people, it was like a big, bold sign post there, like a big billboard, just really kind of like statement demanding some type of response. And I was trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do with this? So I think that is a great way to be able to ask ourselves, how do we respond to these really big statements, to these really big opinions that are steeped in judgment and just inviting some type of disagreement or some type of confrontation? We're going to answer some of those questions. I would love for you to take notes. If there is a tip, if there is a tool, if there is a language, or there is insight that resonates with you. And please do take notes. We all have busy lives. And it might be that you want to go back and refer to this when you think there might be a gathering or a situation where you might be exposed to these big, bold statements. Or maybe even you're not expecting a big, bold statement type of conversation, but just to be able to practice and be able to get more confident in your own competence and responding to these big, bold, sometimes polarizing statements. So I want to go back to the beginning, a very good place to start, and talk about some really kind of foundational things. And this will be the premise of my time here with you right now. The first thing is, did you know that there are four purposes of conversation? And you may want to write these down because we're going to refer back to them. The first purpose of conversation is foremost to inform people. And that might be just passing information along. It might be at the breakfast table. It might be in a work meeting. It might be, "Hey, honey, remember we got to do this tonight," whatever it is. First purpose of conversation is to inform. The second is to be able to consult with someone. Maybe you're thinking about a new direction. Maybe you just want to say, "Hey, can I just get a sanity check here?" Or, "I'm really curious about what other people think about this so I can take that information in, assess it, sit with it, and hopefully make a more reflective and informed decision." Now, the third purpose of conversation is to connect with people. We're human beings. We love to connect socially, and that is to build relationships. These can be friend relationships, professional relationships, mentor-mentee relationships. But one of the purposes of conversations is to build relationships. And finally, to be able to convince people. And that is really to influence their thinking or behavior. Now, if you're a parent, you do a lot of time informing and connecting and consulting and influencing behavior. Now, where I want to dive into is this intersection between connecting and convincing. Remember, connecting is to build relationships and convincing is to influence thinking or behavior. And in my time, what I have found is that the intersection between convincing and connecting can be a bit of a hot mess. And oftentimes, what we end up doing is we want to connect and convince so we can all be upset together, And that, can be good because, there's an old adage that nothing unites like a common enemy. And that might indeed be true. However, it's focusing on the negative aspect of the situation versus the more kind of positive, more connecting aspects of the situation. So, what can we do? Well, we can realize that if people are complaining about things, that in fact, a complaint is nothing more than a request in disguise. Isn't that fascinating? That if we reframe a complaint is that if somebody is actually making a request, then it kind of takes the sting. It kind of takes the hookiness out of it, the hook that's trying to drag you in and pull you in to the situation. Now, have you made complaints trying to get attention, trying to get somebody to change their behavior or something? We kind of have. And one of the things that I'm hoping for you is that from this point forward, you think about others, that when you hear a complaint, you reform it into a request. And sometimes the request can be really loaded. Sometimes it can be kind of mean and nasty, but it's still a request. Similarly speaking, what about you? Do you complain to be able to make a request to draw attention to something that you think is important or something that you think is deficient? Well, maybe it might be more empowering to be able to reframe it in the form of a request rather than a complaint. Now, I would like for you to increase what I refer to as your listening fluency. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Is that we train our ears to listen for important things that give us a clue about what might be going on that's important to the other person. Because if people feel as though their important needs aren't getting met, then there can be conflict. So here's a thing that I was trained on when I was a new mediator, and I train people on all the time. The power of 3. Now, if you hear something once, you hear it the first time. If you hear something a second time, it might be that particular person, forgot that they already told you this story. I don't know about you, but I sometimes just kind of get on a roll and start telling the same story again, forgetting that I might have mentioned it to somebody before. Or me telling the story is just my way of explaining a situation to you. And if we talk on that situation, then I go back and I explain the whole thing. Well, once, twice, however, if you've heard it 3 times, hold on a second. I'm busy. I got to turn that down. So if I hear it 3 times, then I assume that person doesn't feel heard. One of the challenges is that if somebody doesn't feel heard, they will talk to more people in more ways, in more modalities, with increasing frequency and increasing intensity. So going back to that original fellow, I'm wondering if he didn't feel heard, that he wanted to say something loud and a big impact statement in front of a whole bunch of people to compel people to listen to him, to compel people to engage, to compel people to maybe not get in an argument, but maybe to agree with him. Power of connection. So what is it you're listening for? You're listening for repetition, for sure. But the other thing you're listening for is also the emotion. That you're listening for the emotion, not just the facts, but what emotion is there and what level of intensity of emotion is there. So again, it's your listening fluency, that you're not just listening for the facts and just the facts, but you're also listening for what kind of emotions might be there. and also what level of intensity those emotions are there. They could be awesome, like super awesome, intense emotions like happiness and joy. It could also be sort of upset emotions, maybe fear or anger, or frustration, or it could just be a flat affect where we are just kind of beaten down and just really flat about it. So, one of the things that you need to recognize is for a lot of people, they will try to attempt to connect with someone, but they're disguised as attempts to convince. Let me say that again. A lot of times that when people are trying to connect with someone, they try instead to convince them. Now, I don't know about you, but there's the more somebody tries to convince me of their point of view, kind of the less I'm really listening. It doesn't really work that way because we assume, well, gosh, I'm a rational human being. If I just give this other person more information, more data, of course they will come to my point of view. Yeah, not so much. So then we get in this tug of war of trying to convince each other. So what do you need to do? You need to stop, you need to look, and you need to listen. Well, actually, I don't even want to use that word need. It sounds really judgy about me directing you. You could stop, you could look, and you could listen for what may be going on under the surface. And you could ask yourself, what are we or what am I trying to accomplish here? Are they trying to inform? Are they trying to get some consultation? Are they trying to connect? Or are they trying to convince? And oftentimes in conversations, people try to do all four, but aren't really clear that what of those they're trying to do. So it gets really, really convoluted. It gets really, really ambiguous. So for you, being able to try to think, am I trying to inform? Am I trying to consult with this person? Am I trying to connect or am I trying to convince them? And maybe just kind of keep your radar screen open. And what do you think that they might be doing? Now you could be saying, yeah, Carol, yeah, but that's all really great. And then I'll listen to them and I'll come up with a yeah, but. Well, I would like for you to take away the yeah, but, because the but really devalues what they're saying. And if they feel devalued, they're going to have a negative opinion about you. And the yeah, but may be a prompt for you to try to give more information or for you to convince or for you in some way to kind of undermine what that person is thinking or feeling. Not so much. Let's kind of take a page out of the folks who do improvisation and experts in conflict resolution. And that is we substitute the yeah, but for the yes, and. Yes, we may not agree with what they're saying, but we can certainly acknowledge the emotion that they're having. Yes. And what do we want them to do? Well, we want them to share. Because one of the things is that it's really hard to be positional with someone when they are really curious and interested in what you have to say. And so you can say, rather than immediately responding, you can say, yes, and tell me how that experience was meaningful for you. Even if it's an experience, you're like, whoa, what was happening with that? You can ask them, yeah, tell me how you connected with others in that. Tell me a little about your story and what your thought process was in doing that, or what your thought process is in, really supporting this one political figure, or what your thought process is of really loving this particular movie or television show or restaurant, whatever it is. And you know what you've done? You've immediately gone from polarizing to engaging. Isn't that great? From polarizing to engaging. And you do it with the power of questions, with the power of curiosity. And some of the curiosity questions are, what's important for me to understand here about your point of view? What's important for me to kind of understand about your experience? And you could say, oh, that's fascinating. How interesting. Tell me more about what that experience was like for you. Tell me about what type of experiences you had that led you to that particular feeling or that particular point of view. And you listen, with eyes open and brain open. And one of the things that's really important to do is simply acknowledge the emotional content, because we are thinking and feeling human beings. We don't disassociate our feelings from the facts. And in fact, we may have really emotional ties to those facts. And what we want to do is start looking through things through what I call the trust lens. Now, you might say, Carol, what is the trust lens? Well, I'm going to put on my glasses and double check my notes, and I'm telling you the exact definition that I wanted to do for the trust lens. And that is that when we want to be able to up the trust quotient by looking through the trust lens, meaning for ourselves, are we trying to convince people of our rightness or righteousness of our point of view? And, is it that we may be blaming or shaming or labeling the other person, because othering and blaming and shaming and labeling, oh, what an idiot, what a psychopath, oh, what a terrible person. We kind of dehumanize them and we make them the other. And then we are really less likely to try to be curious, because deep polarizing conversations, we've kind of lost the curiousness about the other person. So try to be able to look through, a trust lens with them and listening to their story, trying to figure out, what is it that I should be curious about in this situation? And that will slowly help you develop trust and rapport with the other person. So one of the things I think is consistent about all polarizing conversations, it kind of comes down to a couple of foundational questions, which is, how do we treat each other? And also, how should people act toward one another? And also, how are we to act consistently with our own values? Interesting, isn't it? How we treat other people, how should other people act toward one another, and how do we act consistently with our values? So, by way of a little bit of a story, I knew a couple who was deeply committed, deeply in love, and they were on polar opposite sides of the political spectrum. And one of the things that happened is they had a conversation that came up, and one of the people in the couple said, I just don't care about that. And the other person said, how could you not care about that? And how could you possibly support someone who blank, 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 blank? Now, that was exactly that intersection of trying to connect and trying to convince within an interpersonal and a loving relationship. And even in those types of relationships, it can get really messy. And I think part of the underlying conversation that one person has, because she thought that one person on that political spectrum was acting really terribly toward others, there's this underlying question of like, will you treat me like that? Where's the line for you? Is there a line for you? I mean, those are much deeper questions than how could you support that person? And it goes to, how do we as human beings want to be able to treat each other? And also in years of increased political activity, it's kind of, what should government do? What should government not do? What kind of standards should we hold people to? And then but it goes down to, how do we want to treat each other? And other big questions are, where is there a line for you? Is there a line for you? Well, that's a much more interesting conversation, isn't it? And you can navigate through difficult dialogue. Now, here are a couple of suggestions. First, identify what's your concern. I mean, what's the deep concern about? The second thing is, if there is a conflict or tension or frustration, chances are that someone feels a core value that they have or they believe that is universal is somehow threatened or undermined. So what core values might be at stake for each of you? And then the other thing is, nothing tells someone that you're really listening, that you're taking the time to put on that trust lens, than repeating back what my high school English teacher said verbatim, word for word. And in as much as you want to repeat back the facts and the emotions and what you believe the level of the intensity is. Now, remember, we're going to avoid that yeah, but, and we're going to maybe institute a yes, and. And if there are differing points of view, we could kind of underline what maybe some of the core curiosity concerns might be. We can just say, yet. You don't maybe care about those particular things, yet I really do. And I'm curious about how our elected officials, or how, if we value respect, how we reconcile those types of things. And also in this dialogue, if they do make a good point, say, you make a good point. Nothing de-escalates that. But chances are there are some curiosity questions in there, and exploring values and kind of trying to find out what maybe some common ground is. And it might be the common ground is that you both deeply care about this. And I often say, even if people are in conflict, they at least have a conflict in common. And it might be that we really deeply care about this, and we have very different ideas about what a possible solution or solutions are. So back to the story that we started with. We're at that person at the front of the room who said, how do you deal with people who believe blah, 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 blah. Big, bold statement that's just sitting out there. And so there I was. And I said, give me a minute to think about it. And it could be, you can say to those people with the different beliefs, I think your experience is different than mine. So ultimately, we're acknowledging everybody's experience and even acknowledging the differences. So that helps us navigate the intersection between connecting and convincing, and more about connecting and informing. So what did you get out of it? When you get a chance, you can always go back and rewatch and hopefully start using all of the tips and the tools here and start practicing to have some important conversations that you will find value in, and conversations that others will find value in. And I wish you well. Thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon. Take care.
That was so awesome. Like, I loved what you said at the end about, I think we have different experiences, because Carol, that actually happened to me in a situation. I was actually in one of my meetings, and we were having a very heated discussion, like with another one of my colleagues, and he was trying to convince, and this was not in the meeting, this was just during lunchtime. And I kept going back and saying, I think we have to agree to disagree. Like, I respect what you're saying. I can see your perspective. I don't see it that way. But he kept coming back at me. And so at the end, and I don't know, this is kind of embarrassing. So just between you and I and the whatever on the wall, but I'm like, he goes, well, what can I do to make you comfortable right now? And I just lost it. And I'm like, you need to just stop engaging with me right now. Like, I need you to just stop talking to me. And I felt so frustrated because I didn't have anything better to say. But after multiple times of trying to have a respectful conversation, and then realizing that they're not really trying to have a respectful conversation with you, they're just trying to convince you. And it didn't work in that situation where I was saying, we have different life experiences, we have different perspectives, I respect what you're trying to say, I don't necessarily agree. I see what you're trying to say, but I have to represent my demographic. And, we just see things differently.
I love that you were able to connect with it. And even the term, like, we have to agree to disagree, I think it is so overused, because the thing is, I don't think anybody actually really does agree to disagree. There's like this underlying emotion and resentment, but it's just a way of saying, I'm stopping the conversation. I'm not doing anymore. And I think it's because people feel as though they were trying to be sold or convinced or lured, or that someone was trying to undermine their point of view and maybe using like debate tactics or sales tactics. In that circumstance. And so just really being able to say, like, look, my life experience is different than yours. I have an experience that's different to you. And not to say that I say this to my clients when I'm doing work in the workplace that may have overtones of people being treated differently. It's like, not that to say that your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, like where you were brought up, how you brought up, has anything to do with anything, but sometimes it does. And that informs the experience, and his life experience informs his beliefs, his values, and what behaviors he believes supports the values, or what he thinks people should happen. So, and what was the question that he asked you again? Like, what can I do to make you feel comfortable?
Yeah. What can I do to make you feel comfortable right now?
Okay, that's just, I'm just kind of reacting because that's a little ew. It kind of
It
feels,
was very
it
ew.
feels like ew, and part of it was like, okay, I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm not sure it's people's role to make people people uncomfortable, or to make them comfortable, when particularly they have been driving to be able to convince them. Because at that point, it's like, well, I want you to be comfortable so that way I can perceive that you're in agreement with me. Um, and or that that the conversation has gone through, that they realize that they may have damaged trust, they're not making a connection. Um, and I think being able to say, like, our perspectives differ, um, is one way to be, is a different way of saying, I'm going to agree. We that our perspectives are different, therefore the solutions and even how we're framing this issue are going to be different. And because how we frame the issue is going to impact the solutions, and what our values are going to impact, and how we're defining our values are going to impact it. But ew. Yeah, that was kind of ew. And it's like, well, yeah, that's not really your role. I mean, do you want a dialogue with me? Because I think some people confuse like a dialogue with debate, and what they want to do is spar and get points and put
Right.
people on their back foot. And I often say that I think in the US culture, we confuse debate with constructive criticism. And one is, I may not be asking for your criticism, I may not be asking for your feedback at all. And I just heard something the other day, and it was like, and you and others might have heard it, is like, why would you take feedback from someone who you wouldn't even take advice from? And you need
Oh,
to be able to develop a rapport and a set of trust, that you may not have like a lot of personal trust, but you could say, like, hey, based on your life experience and your positional power or your work experience, I think you have a perspective to be able to share with me, and I'm interested in your perspective. And that's another way of saying, I'm interested in your perspective, which is another way of like kind of increasing dialogue. But to the whole piece of like, was he really trying to convince, and was he trying to make you feel quote unquote comfortable? Because maybe he realized that, maybe he acted outside of what the social norms would have been in that piece. And, I just, and again, that just feels like a little bit, that kind of feels a little, and I don't know him, but it feels a little gendering. Like, would he have said like, well, am I going to make men feel more comfortable? Or did I do something weird? I don't know. I've got a lot of competing thoughts about that, and that aren't fully formed yet, but great share, Sue. Thank
oh,
you
that
so much.
was embarrassing. That was an embarrassing share. But it actually leads right into Melissa's question, which is, is there anything wrong with just active listening?
No, not at all. Not at all. But here is one of my questions. Melissa and others, what are you actively listening for?
Yeah, what's the end state, right?
Yeah, and I also, it kind of goes back to what I said, is like, what I suggest that people listen for, what are the underlying core values, what are the needs, what are the embedded requests, and what are the hopes in there. Because when we say active listening, it could be like, okay, we're just listening, for their point of view to make sure we have their point of view, or are we just going, and nodding our head or whatever. But when I ask people, like, what is it you're actively listening for? Um, that's something different. And I always say, listen for embedded requests, listen for complaints, listen for value statements. And then that's an interesting area. Not everyone is interested in dialogue. They are just interested in giving a bit of a blurb out there. And if that's the case, totally fine. Then you're not really interested. But you can also say, you bring up, a couple of really interesting points of view. You don't have to say they're correct points of view. You could say that they're interesting, or they're somewhat intriguing, and they differ from mine. Help me understand what really informed your points of view, on this. And a lot of give people a minute or two, because they may not know. It might have been, well, that was just how my family did it, or whatever it is. So it's like, oh, that's really interesting. So it's like continuing a family value, family just tradition. How do you see yourself continuing this? What about this was so important that your family embodied it? So again, it's like a lot of curiosity questions.
So, I mean, Melissa brings up a good point in that it's making me now think about, the holidays spent with um, older generations of our family and younger generations where, the intent might be like my intent would be around the table just to listen to get some of our family history and to just hear about their experiences. And so I guess what I would want out of that is just to understand where we came from and understand what formed them. And so maybe in that way, is there anything wrong with just active listening, or are we pretty much beholden to interacting? We're not trying to persuade, we're just trying to pull out more, right? Because we want to know.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Where I thought you was going to go is, what happens if we have that one relative who
Oh,
is making those big, bold statements, and all of those different things. Like, I mean, are they getting attention? Are they trying to get attention? Are they a type of person who likes to rabble rouse because they know it'll light a fire and then it'll kind of implode and it's for entertainment value? Well, then again, it's like, okay, well, do you want to be part of their play, or do you decide, oh, that's very interesting, and then be able to change a subject or something like that? And at the dinner table, the people have a bit of a captive audience. But just being able to say, like, okay, what's their intent? Are they looking for agreement? Are they looking for disagreement? Are they looking to be the center of attention? Things like that. But yeah, absolutely, being able to listen. You bring up a really good point. And also, not every comment requires a response.
right.
Yeah, because sometimes you need a little moment to process all of that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's going to be a really interesting holiday season. I know in our family, we are not all on the same page when it comes to political leaning. So the holidays are interesting for us. And I don't think I'm an anomaly. I think a lot of people out there are the same way. And so some of this I can totally understand in the professional environment where this makes total sense, apply it immediately. But in the personal space and with personal relations, like tomorrow, we're having our big NMSN luncheon tomorrow. There can be a lot of people in the room. We don't all agree, but you're just starting to get to know people, and you might have someone who goes there, but you're looking at them and there's somebody you need to know. But wow, you just plop that big landmine down. I don't know where to go.
So I think a couple of different things. One is, I think that plopping the landmine down has been role modeled a lot. It's reiterated, that there aren't rooms for dialogue, that they want sound bites. So, maybe even say, like, you can even steal this. Hey, that's an interesting soundbite. Tell me a little bit more deeply about what's behind all of that. Tell me about what's important to you. about that. And then not everybody knows how to answer that question. They know the soundbite, but being able to say like, okay, so tell me more. Tell me about what the personal background was about that. And what I see in the political sphere a lot is that people box people and kind of dehumanize them, that they are a label, that they are a political party only. And that is as dehumanizing as anything else when we start labeling and othering people, of just being able to say, help me understand about, your approach, like, okay, you could say, so beyond the label, what's the concern? Beyond the label, what do you understand their concern to be? And how, what are your thoughts about how that concern might be addressed? So different things like that, because I think, certain huge, big topics, pollution, climate, economy, opportunity of access for military spouses for various things, that if we get past the statement and start talking about, help me understand your thinking about this, that's really important. And that could even be, on the dinner table, talking about people's history. Because I know a little bit about you, and I know a little bit, well, one, I know that your family is great cooks, what people may not know is pretty much every book behind you is a cookbook.
All of them.
All of them. And what people don't know is there's 3 bookshelves, about 5 or 6 tiers high, that are all cookbooks. So that's an important thing about your family, but also your family history really informs their view of government. So being able to figure out, like, well, what seminal events really informed your view of government, and knowing that aligning with one political party, or saying this is my designation, how is that meaningful for you? What about that particular designation? Because the parties are different. They change dramatically from generation to generation. So, what is it currently about the party, or currently about an approach that is meaningful to you? Because I'd be very, very surprised if everyone aligned absolutely lockstep with every single thing that comes out of a caucus, because it's done by committee, which means that there are compromises, which means certain things are elevated, certain things are suppressed. That it doesn't mean that is the political opinion of absolutely everybody that is in that affiliation. It means that these are the platforms that we could get enough agreement on to be able to push forward, that we've come to a collective that this is reasonable enough. And if anybody's worked on any committees or things like that, that there are vastly different opinions, and there's a lot of work involved in coming up with those statements that we think are workable, but there are varying degrees of commitment to those particular things.
Yeah, and you were talking about committees, and thinking about kids committees and PTAs and things like that. Whenever you put on an event, the end product is usually pretty far from where you started, because someone has a vision, and then they incorporate everyone's thoughts and suggestions, and then through the iterations, the end product is great because it's it includes everybody's input, but it may be pretty far from the initial vision.
Correct. And in law school, one of the things that we learned is that that one particular person's view of how they want this done for themselves in their life, government and law is trying to be able to do it for the collective, for absolutely everyone. So may work for one person, may not work for 10 or 10,000 or 10 million or 100 million different people. So it's also kind of at the scale. So at the scale, what are we talking about? And, at the local scale versus the family scale versus the state scale versus, national and international scales. So, that might be an interesting question of how does the scale of the solution, or how does the scale of the problem impact the solution that you're proposing?
Are you telling me to go back to school?
No, absolutely not.
I'm like, wait a minute, you told me to go back to school. So this makes me think of one other thing and I hope we're monitoring the questions. So if anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat and I'll ask Carol. But so this is about handling difficult conversations. So can we talk a little bit about, a time and a place for everything? So absolutely have the difficult conversations, but I think I want to get away from having like saying any broad statements, because then everybody might walk away thinking, oh, we're talking about having difficult conversations everywhere all the time. And I don't think that's what we're saying. We're saying there are some places that lend toward having a more in-depth conversation. And there are definitely some places where you might just want to say, I'd love to continue this offline. Can we set up a call or, a
Yeah.
chat or whatever? And I mean, I think that's an important distinction. And can you talk us through that a little bit? So like, give us just some cultural competency on what's appropriate for what environment.
Okay. So I'm remembering back when you and I were in college, and there was a program put on by one of like the campus religious organizations, and they had, I'm remembering this, and they had, I think, one of the senators from Colorado come and speak, and someone stood up in the middle of his remarks, and he was talking about his faith and his faith journey and things like that, and then said, "Senator, I can keep my silence no longer." And everyone went, "Huh?" Because, anyway, and the senator said, I'm not going to talk about my voting record here. I'm here for a different reason. So that is a little story about what is the purpose of the gathering. Think about, what is the purpose of the gathering? Is it to make connections with people? Is it to, and usually most social ones are to make connections. And for deeper conversations, it's to happen afterward, once people are sussing it out of, is this person or is this topic interesting enough to be able to continue the conversation? So that also then goes to your role in this case, going back to this, this poor slob who I think was really humiliating because he got so many stink eye looks. It's because he kind of broke a social protocol, that it's like that. And I think that I have a couple different thoughts. One, he didn't even go to our campus, so it was somebody who drove down from a different campus, Boulder. So anyway, they took advantage of an opportunity. And some people, particularly if they feel marginalized and don't feel as though they have access, they will take advantage of an opportunity. So being able to, and I see this happen in professional aspects a lot, where people will be in front of a group in a meeting and they'll start kind of critiquing, or they'll start going off into a topic that doesn't really involve a lot of the people, but they're taking advantage of, I have this person in front of me right now. And it's a natural tendency of, I have this person in front of me. This is a topic I want to talk about, but being able to say, like, hey, the purpose of this meeting was this, and we want to honor the purpose, and we want to honor the other people and their time that's in the room. So, why don't, the two of you have the opportunity after we're done with this to be able to connect offline and continue the conversation, or continue it outside, or whatever it is. So I think just kind of recognizing what are the goals and some of the social norms. And if someone is really wanting to get attention, just saying, look, it looks like you're really wanting to talk to me about this. This wasn't why I came here today. This wasn't why they came here today. And I want to, kind of, honor what the goals were for this. But I do see that, just since I have you in the room, I'm going to tell you what I think. But also, again, the kind of contrasting point is, if people aren't going to have the opportunity to be able to do this, they may jump out and try to confront. But again, the confronting is trying to convince and blame and shame and show the wrongness of something, versus saying, I'm really curious about what you're doing. I have a couple of ideas that I'd like to share with you. Are you willing to listen? Might this be a good time? So you're offering the opportunity versus, taking the center stage and spotlight away when you have an unwilling audience, because you have an unwilling audience and you haven't built up that trust lens and you haven't figured out what your point is. If you try to convince before connecting, it's not going to work. You look like a jackalope.
Yeah. And, you bring up a really great point too. And I know a lot of people, because I recognize a lot of the names on here and on Facebook, a lot of people also speak. And so this is a really great tip for how to answer some of those questions when they come across and they're like from left field and, they're not relevant. So that's a really great tool to just say, I'm really interested in having that conversation with you, or I'd love to talk to you about that offline. I mean, and that's so important. I hope you guys recognize how important that is, because whenever I go speak, I feel like the Q&A session is the stump the chump time. And then sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what that's about. And so to be able to say, I'm not even sure, but I'll get that. I'll get an answer for you afterwards is so important. And it's so key.
Yeah. Yeah. Stump the chump. You crack me up. But, again, it's like not everyone can form the question or the statement eloquently. Mark Twain, had said, like, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long letter instead. And a lot of people will tell stories to be able to try to convince a point, and other people will talk out loud to try to gather their thoughts. But it's really kind of, if you're in a social networking environment, one of the kind of rules is you're spending maybe 3 to 5 minutes with people, because the
Right.
goal is to move through the crowd, and not monopolize people, and therefore like how you're broaching the conversation. So for our military spouses out there, it's a little bit, for a networking tip, it's a little bit like doing your elevator pitch, with the idea of like, gather kind of a couple of key talking points in a way that's engaging for people, that makes them go, that's interesting, I want to know more. And the basis of the elevator is that you may only have like a floor or two, so less than 30 seconds.
Right.
But if you feel pitchy, meaning like you're trying to sell something, that's not really connecting. But being able to say, like, how can you do an opening statement for a conversation that lures people in to say they're interesting, it's curious, it may be a different point of view. However, how they express it is interesting and intriguing versus demanding and judgmental.
Yeah, because I mean, the demanding judgmental means that they might just shut you out, shut you down immediately, and
Yeah.
you've lost the opportunity to make a connection before you even got to say 3 words, because they're already offended by something you said. No, I love all of this, and I knew I would. And the whole time I was watching the video, and the whole time I'm talking to you, Carol's husband's name is John. I just wondered, does John ever win an argument?
Oh, he will say, you don't always practice what you preach. And I'm like, dude, I do, and you're annoying me. So we could call him up and ask him, and he would probably say no. But what I also want to convey to people is, just because I do this, sometimes it is a deliberate choice that I have to say, I have to think about how I'm going to approach this. And just because I do this work, it doesn't mean that there aren't arguments and differences of opinion. I just want the amplitude of it to be less. I want it to be the duration of it to be shorter. And when it comes up, it to be fewer and further in between. So, I mean, just don't, because I mean, conflict tells that somebody cares about something. That it's like apathy is the difference. Conflict tells you that somebody's got enough skin in the game that they care about it, and they're trying to engage because they care. And so maybe that's a great question of saying, you seem to really care about this. It seems as though you've got skin in the game on this. Help me understand what skin in the game you have.
No, I love that, because there are so many controversial topics going on right now. And it it is easier to have conversations with people who share your viewpoint. It's so much easier. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world where we can only choose to interact with people who share our
But we
viewpoint.
do at book club with wine, and we can sit around and talk about people. I do it
Right.
every day when I watch like the Real Housewives or like, Below Decks, whatever. I sit back and John's there. He's like, these people are terrible. I'm like, yeah, these people are terrible. I gotta keep watching.
I'm
So
doing market research here.
I know, exactly. It's like, how do people handle conflict? So, and it's done in different ways. It's done in different ways.
So no, this has been great. And so I think at this point, I mean, I'm gonna sit and chat with you all night with wine after everybody leaves. But for everybody else, is there anything that we missed on the video that you didn't have a chance to say, or in our conversation? Is there a question you wish I'd asked you, or that somebody else should have asked you? Is there anything that you feel that's lingering that people should know?
Well, first off, if you're in any type of conversation, professional or whatever, ask the question that you just asked. Is there anything that you wanted to speak of? Is there a question you expected me to ask that I didn't? And again, it's a sense of curiosity, of giving people the time and space to gather their thoughts, to organize their thoughts, and to decide if they want to share their thoughts. And so this is maybe one takeaway is everyone does that. They gather their thoughts, they organize their thoughts, and they decide to share their thoughts. And I think for any type of dialogue or conversation that's more meaningful, of we get off of a platitude or a soundbite or a blaming or a shaming statement, and we really say, you know, that's really important. And the other thing I'll just call out of those four purposes of conversation, it will help you be more impactful if you get clear on what you want. Because what I find is people say, no, I really, really want to connect. But then really, when it starts getting into it, they kind of want to, they want to convince. And so if you're clear of saying, if I just really want to inform, how am I forming my message? If I want to consult, how am I forming my thoughts, and what kind of ask am I making of people? And then if I want to connect, what would I do? If I'm looking to convince, what would I be doing? So really kind of being very clear on your purpose, and then coming up with a couple of points on how you're going to approach it to be true to your purpose. And also recognize they may be unclear on their purpose as well. So if you want to say, hey, how are you looking to connect with me? Because this feels like you're trying to convince me about something, or is it, do you just want to tell me about something, or are you looking for advice on something? I think that you can use the power of questions to help the other person get clear on what they're trying to do, because that will impact how you respond.
And I guess with everything else, it just gets more comfortable the more you practice it, because I can already tell, like, just putting some of these things in place, I'm going to be uncomfortable because I'm not a confrontational person. So having these uncomfortable conversations is going to be a little daunting at first. So does that come with muscle memory? And
I think look at it as not that I'm uncomfortable with conflict. People may be deeply uncomfortable with conflict. There may be life experiences that avoidance or minimizing was a lifesaver. I mean, an actual lifesaver. Maybe saying like, hey, I'm learning a new skill. I'm learning a new habit, and I'm not quite comfortable in it, that it's taking a little bit more mental and emotional investment than the more familiar way of doing it. So just say it might just be that you're growing into your own muscle memory in that respect. So think about it that way.
I will. And thank you. Where can people find you, Carol, after this session? Where can they find you?
Well, you can find me at a couple different places. I'm on on a lot of the different social media. So you can find me on LinkedIn, where several years ago, someone said I was one of the top 30 people to follow on LinkedIn for conflict resolution.
Wow.
I am also on Instagram and Facebook, and you can also find me on YouTube, where I put up videos to help people increase their conflict competencies. And if you want to, you could just go on to managingconflict.com, and you can message me there, as well as message me through LinkedIn. And if people are interested, you can also subscribe to my conflict tip of the day, a tip, a trick, a technique, an insight, all designed to help people increase their conflict resolution muscles. And you can do that via the website, managingconflict.com.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing those insights with us. And for all of you guys out there joining us, don't forget, tomorrow we are taking a day off because we're going to be meeting in person. I wish you were here. We're going to be meeting in person for a luncheon over in DC. So that gives you an entire day to catch up with these 4 sessions, to replay them. And remember, every single session has a worksheet. So, we want to leave you guys with tangible action items. We're not inviting people like Carol here just to talk to you for the sake of talking to you. We hope that, you get some good tangible takeaways and that you enact some of these things right away. So we have a worksheet for every single session for you to download. It's in the lobby, and share with your friends. And if you haven't registered because you're watching us on Facebook, you will have to register to access the worksheets and the replays. So we will see you back here on Thursday at 10 a.m. Till then, bye guys.